Hello and welcome to Responsible Government Contracting. This workshop is part 2 of a 3-part series introducing government contracting. Today, Mr. Andy Bennett will discuss researching and finding opportunities with the government. Thank you, and find us on the web at nc-rgc.com.
Hey, we said my name's Andy, and we're going to go through this. We're going to go through part 2 today. And if you, like you said, if you missed part 1, no worries. We're going to do this again next month and every month. So part 1, 2, and 3, register. And then today we're going to look at research, how to dive in and actually find opportunities for clients or for your company. And then part 3, we're going to talk about how to actually respond to those proposals.
Okay.
We've been doing this for a minute as a country, so this is complicated. These are some pictures that I took myself of some folks that have been doing this stuff and for years. Those are my kids there, and this is not new. The government did not just decide all of a sudden that we're going to do procurement. We've been doing this for hundreds of years, even before the United States was the United States. So that's really what we're gonna talk about today, is how those different people interoperate with the procurement process and how they buy stuff and how the requirements go into the contracts and the solicitations become contracts. And it can be a long process if the government's buying big stuff, expensive procurements. But it doesn't always have to be. I mean, a lot of procurements are happening in days, not weeks. And most contracts are happening in either weeks or months, not years. So it's not always a very arduous, very long process. So we're going to talk about what that process is and where these folks fit in the spectrum here. I like to have a little bit of fun, and we do this a little bit more in detail on part 1. But for today, so that we understand who these, and kind of as a little refresher here, who these legs of the table are. And the first ones up are the most important, because they're the ones that are helping you get your bills paid. And from a contracting perspective, that accounts payable, accounts receivable, finance kind of folks, they sit behind the scenes. They're not deciding who wins and loses contracts, but they're making sure that first the government people know how much money they have in their budgets. And then when you're winning contracts, how do you get your bills paid? Are you submitting your invoice correctly? Do you have any questions about the invoice system? Because it's not one size fits all. There are numerous financial systems that the government uses, and it's not all the same. If you or I run my company on QuickBooks, works fine for me, but I'm also not a multi-trillion-dollar organization. So imagine running that kind of financial system for a massive behemoth. The single largest buyer in the world is the United States federal government. So imagine for a second, buying at that magnitude and spending that much money every single year. It gets super complicated. So the finance people are there to help guide through that process. So use them accordingly. They're there to help. We're talking today about finding and researching and getting these opportunities in front of folks. So if you or if we're CEOs or presidents of our companies, we get to wear the cool hat. We get to be the commander of the boat, the captain of the boat. We get to be the commander of the army unit that's taking that hill, the chief, the director of the organization, whoever that person in charge is. On the civilian side, I get to make decisions for my company, right, wrong, or indifferent. I get to make decisions for my company because I'm the president of my company. I have signature authority for my company. But these guys don't. On the government side, these folks set direction. They set broad mission type orders. They set intent. This is the direction that our organization is going to go, usually in a 12-month, over the next 12 months, over the next year. So they don't have the authority to buy a cup of coffee, but they give direction for their organization. All right, so that's the commander. I'm just going to call them the commander. Next up, we start getting into the details, and this is where it matters, especially in the construction world. Think of these folks as not the general contractor, because this is the government side. Think of these folks, I'm going to call them end users, but for construction, this would be like the owner's rep, like the representative for the owner of the building that's being constructed. This is the person who understands the specifications. We need 100,000 square foot warehouse. We need a 50,000 square foot office building. We need it spec'd out for medical grade offices. Whatever those requirements and the details are, the end user is the one that knows that. And that's going to matter today because those requirements and the specifications and the statements of work, all of those documents are originating from the information these guys have. And again, they do not have decision authority, but they have shaping influence. So if they need a 15-inch monitor versus a 14-inch monitor for their laptops, or they need, air conditioning versus, open whatever it is, right? So the different options, these folks are the ones that are going to specify. When the commander is talking, it's these men and women that are taking notes, because the boss is talking in broad, we're going in that direction generally. The project managers, program managers, operational end users, mission partners, all the same kind of job titles for the same person I'm talking about. They're looking specific, project oriented, right? So the boss is going broad, we're going to go specific. All right, so these folks write those requirements and come up with the details. And then best for last, the contracting officers are the ones that get to make the decisions. They wear the crown for a reason, because they're the ones that have signature authority. They're not the subject matter experts. They are not the ones that know the details of the job to be done. They're taking that information from the end users, putting it into the competitive solicitation, and then going out to businesses to compete. The contract officer is calling balls and strikes. They're the referee. They're making sure that everything is equitable and fair and competition is what it's supposed to be. What these folks care about also is small business. So when we talk about small business utilization and what those requirements are, the buck stops at the contracting officer's desk. Contracting officers are the ones that get fired if they don't meet their small business objectives. About a quarter, 23% every year. And then each of the small business set-aside categories, minority-owned 5%, woman-owned 5%, veteran-owned 5% now, and hub-zone 3%. So these are the ones. End users, great, you're small, doesn't really do anything for me. But contracting officers, these are the ones that care if you're a small business or not. So now that we shift over from who the players are, who the four legs of the table are, now let's see where they sit and what kind of language and how we talk to them and how we research based on what their perceptions are. This is the same workflow, just lined out. The commander says the broad, end users are going to focus, give that requirement over to the contracting officer, and then the contracting officer is going to play, they're going to do the solicitation. They're going to, administer and go through that process with companies. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one, but I just want to show here. First off, the Small Business Administration is great. They do wonderful things, but they don't have money. So they're not the ones that are putting contracts out. They're there in a support capacity. So when we're talking about these guys over here, Apex Accelerators, SBDC, SCORE, any of the SBA stuff, those guys are all doing support functions. They're not awarding contracts. When we start talking about the agencies, these are the ones that we're talking about. So if that's the headquarters level, or if this, if Jill down here is the one wearing that commander's hat, she's the one in charge of that organization, then Tim is that end user, right? So which hat is Tim wearing? Tim's wearing the project manager hat. Tim is listening to what Jill is saying and going specific. All right, so Tim is doing those specific projects. Lucy is way over here. And what's interesting, and we'll talk about this when we actually start looking at the websites, Lucy may or may not work for the same organization. She may or may not have the same boss at the headquarters level. Sometimes this contracting function is done by a totally different agency. So while they all might be wearing FEMA hats, Lucy may be a NASA person or a Army person, right? So that might be a different agency, which is going to matter when, again, we start looking at the details here. So just kind of keep that in mind. And so, you know, let me just reiterate, if you have any questions, please chime in. So we, you know, because I can talk forever, but I want to make sure it's beneficial to you. So please chime in if you have any questions.
No problem.
Gotcha. So when we're looking at the process, this is the high level process for all things. This is every step that they're going to go through, regardless if they're doing super complicated stuff or they're doing, you know, office paper for their, you know, printer. However, they don't the contracting officers manage this process. They're the ones that control this. And they do not have to go through an industry day to buy printer paper. So it's at the discretion of the contracting officer, depending on how complicated the effort is. Because if you're just buying something simple, like $10,000 or less, somewhere in that kind of ballpark, you don't need to go through a bunch of this stuff. You might even not go through all just the request for quote and just do that. If you're doing a battleship though, right? If you're building the next fighter jet, that's a years long process, and that's going to go through all of these steps, maybe a couple of times of these steps, right? So just make sure we're tracking those. Like I said, with the contracting officer caring a lot about small business, how do they do that? Because if I'm wearing this hat and I've got a stack of contracts that I've got to write all day long, and I'm busy because I've got a lot of contracts, I don't have time as a contracting officer to go out and find companies that are small in those categories. So how is that? But I get fired if I don't use the small businesses or meet those objectives. So how does that work? Well, we talk about it a little bit with that, you know, small business advocate. So they're going to use those small business advocates, small business advisors, these kind of people, but they're also going to do this pre-solicitation phase. And pre-solicitation comes by a couple different flavors. So we've got the market research, request for information, and sources sought. Each one, very, very minor differences between those three, but they're basically shopping for small businesses. And these are very, very short, simple responses. These are not long proposals. They're not looking for pricing at this stage. They're looking to see if companies do the thing or provide the thing, and they're small, because it's called the rule of two. If a contracting officer puts out an RFI and they say, all right, let me know who can, you know, mow lawns, landscaping, whatever the requirement may be, and they get 2 small businesses to respond to that RFI, the request for information. Well, now that contracting officer can set aside that competition for only small business. Now, only small businesses can compete on that opportunity. No big companies can submit proposals. They can, but they're not going to be even considered. They're just going to be tossed. So that's significant. If 2 or more woman-owned companies respond, now the contracting officer can set aside that competition for just woman-owned small businesses. Now, let's say a minority-owned company and a woman-owned company respond. Well, it's not 2 minority and it's not 2 woman-owned companies, but they're both small. So the contracting officer can set aside for a small, total small business competition. So it highly, in my opinion, highly benefits you to respond to these sources sought and to these RFIs, because it may set you apart and it may give you a competitive advantage when you're competing, because otherwise you've got to compete full and open, which means the big companies can come in and, you know, low bid the opportunity and usually win it that way. So that's what's going on in the pre-solicitation. These terms are going to be important as we start looking at the actual websites here. Pre-solicitation, solicitation, there's a reason I call those out. We are not part of the internal government stuff. So this is where it's inside baseball. You don't want anything to do with that. So keep away from those kind of conversations. So that's where the government's kind of deciding what it is that they want to do. Then they go out and they do the shopping and the proposal and the competition, and then they go back behind a closed door and decide who won. That's how it works. So what determines if you're a small business or not? There is not a single definition for small. I get this all the time. Well, it's 50 employees. Well, it's $1 million. Well, it's, 5 years or less in operation. No, no. There are hundreds of definitions of small, and they are all listed on this document. The federal government defines small business based on the type of business that you're in. If you are a landscaping company, you are a small business as long as your gross revenues, so how much total monies you've invoiced and gotten paid for the year, are less than $8.5 million, averaging for the previous 5 years. So if you had a great year a few years ago and you made you gross revenue of $10 million, awesome. That does not kick you out as you may still be a small business. So you have to look at what your average gross revenues were for the previous 5 years. And if it's under that dollar threshold, then you're still a small business. Let's look at a different one. If your business is environmental remediation services, this is your line of business. You are not defined by your gross revenues. You are defined by the number of employees you have in your company. It's only going to be one or the other. They're not defining both. So if you have 749 employees, you are still a small business. If you have 751 employees, you are no longer a small business. You've now graduated. All right, so that's how that's how the federal government determines if you're a small business or not. Let's go back to NAICS codes. We were looking at NAICS codes here. That's what these guys are over here. So when I say NAICS code, we talk about this a lot in part 1. But for today, just as a refresher, NAICS code, North American Industry Classification System, that 6-digit number that tells you what kind of business you are. If you are a contracting officer and you are trying to buy that thing because your end users came to you and said, hey, I need 1,000 chairs. Okay. As the contracting officer, you have to decide, and remember, it's your opinion that matters because you get to wear the crown. The contracting officer gets to decide, okay, what is that thing? Is that, 337214 office furniture? Okay, makes sense to me. I think I'm pretty rational. But guess what? If I'm not wearing that crown and it's not my opportunity as a contracting officer, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what the contracting officer thinks. So if that contracting officer thinks that's, 337121 or 337125, that's what it's going to be listed as. It matters. And we're going to need that when we start to research in the next step. Same thing for janitorial services. Any knucklehead is going to see that janitorial services must be listed under 561720. It literally says, it's called out janitorial services, right? Well, guess what? Again, my opinion doesn't matter. 561-740, 812-199. If you are looking only at one NAICS code and you're not hearing what I'm saying, you're going to find that opportunity and you're going to find that opportunity because look, the NAICS code that it's listed under is 561-720. 561-720. But guess what? Uh-oh. You will never see this one because that's listed under a different NAICS code. So stick a pin in the map at what you think that NAICS code is, and then widen that search so that you can find those other opportunities that other people have opinions on. All right, so let's switch gears over to the actual websites here. Let me pause here, Lorraine, and see if you have any questions. Any questions so far?
No, so far I'm following you. Okay.
Okay.
I
So
understand NAICS codes. I understand size, either by dollar value or number of employees.
right. So what we're doing here is we're going to go to Sam. You're familiar with sam.gov?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So when we're going in here and we're looking at opportunities, I'm going to go ahead and credential in. Ba-da-ba-da. And we're going to go over to search and zoom in a little bit. So I hit search, I'm logged in. I know I'm logged in because it says sign out. If I weren't, it would say sign in. So it's kind of a good sanity check. Now I'm going to make sure I'm in the right spot. So all domains, I'm going to go to contract opportunities. And now I'm going to, just like, Amazon or any other website that you can buy stuff, they're going to give you some filter options. This is where I'm going to use those filter options. So for you, you said, permitting, expediting, that kind of thing. I'm going to show you another site that we cover in part 1. This one's super helpful with, if you're not sure what NAICS code you're in, this can help. So let's say, uh, permits, maybe. Let's see if that is anything. Not really. Let's do, you said expediting. I'm not sure if that's what they're going to call it. Let's do construction more broadly. Okay. So now we would just need to look at this and see what kind of fits. Because that's probably, I mean, we need to look at it to see what kind of industry they're in, but construction site preparation, all other specialty, maybe in all other, that's kind of a catch-all if any one particular one doesn't fit. Support, business, no. Survey mapping, no, that's not really stationary. So we would need to look through here, other transportation, no, professional services, maybe. And if we're not sure, because I'm not sure, so there's not a clear-cut answer to this one. So let's kind of widen that out and we'll shift from a NAICS code search to a keyword search, because I'm not sure what clean NAICS code fits that industry quite yet. So let's set that aside for a second and we'll stick with a keyword search. But first, well, yeah, let's do permit, yeah, let's just leave it at permits for now. All right, so 292, and permit is kind of broad, so we're not quite sure if that fits yet, but we're starting this process. We need to find how to match, because it's like reverse classified ads. They are looking for something, but we need to find the same terminology that they're using so that we can meet in the middle. I'm going to go through, okay, so we put the keyword search in there. I don't know what we need to put in for the federal agency, because oftentimes these folks will sit in different organizations. So if I call out, if I look for FEMA, because I'm looking for FEMA, like what I think of as FEMA opportunities, it may be actually a contracting officer from the Army that's doing that work. So if I put the Army here, if I put FEMA here, I'm not going to find them all. And I've been doing this for a while, and different contracting officers interpret this section differently. So I leave this part blank. We can look at, we can put some parameters in for dates. I'm going to go back to notice type here for a second though, because remember those two lines, the pre-solicitation, the solicitation. This is why that was important. Because what I'm going to do is look for sources sought, pre-solicitation, consolidated, solicitation, combined. So I'm going to do these 5 parameters for the search, just so we can look for real opportunity. I don't want something that's been awarded already, because it's not me, so I don't really care. I need to find stuff that hasn't been awarded yet. So those are the categories I'm going to look for. This is where if you had the NAICS code, or if PSC code is similar to NAICS codes, but a little bit different, we may see something in here. License. This is environmental permitting. That's kind of a specialty. Let's see if construction is anything in here. Miscellaneous construction, building, studies. No, that's not really architecture, design. Let's see, permitting isn't specifically called out, so we may shift to a prime sub relationship, because if the government, it's like if you're building a new house, you hire a general contractor to build that house. You don't hire the plumber, the carpenter, the painter. You don't hire the individual trades. So if I'm a plumber, I'm maybe going to find some opportunities where the government's looking for plumbers. But if I'm looking to do plumbing in construction, I'm going to look for general construction so that I can be part of that team. I can be a trade or a subcontractor on that team. All right. So you may have to shift gears a little bit on the search parameters, but we'll just start with this so we can kind of see the process. All right, set aside. Remember what I said about the sources of the pre-solicitation, the RFI step. If the contracting officer doesn't know yet if they're going to set the competition aside, if they're going to do a set aside, then if you're only looking for opportunities that are woman-owned small businesses or minority-owned small businesses, then you're not going to see those others that are in the pre-solicitation phase because they haven't decided yet. So I leave this one open. I leave that field open. Place performance is the same issue with the contracting officer and end user sitting in different physical locations. Or what if it's a headquarters procurement where they are doing multiple locations? Which one do they put? Right, so that one can be a little deceiving, so I like to leave that one blank as well. All right, and as we go, this is going to update real time. So now we're looking at the opportunities over here. So we've reduced it down. We've trimmed some of the non-applicable ones, but we're still kind of broad. So we may shift or look at this from a, so let me back up. Each of these sections is a different opportunity. All right. And one thing and you can tell a lot of information just from this quick snapshot. I can tell that this is the agency, right? So top level, Department of Defense. Next level down is Defense Logistics Agency. And the next level down is Defense Logistics Agency, Aviation. So now we're talking about the office that's doing this procurement, doing this competition. I can look at like the title of what the effort is. This is the notice ID. This is like the social security number for this contract. So this is going to stick with it throughout the process. So if you want to go back and find it, this one is due today. So this one's due in a few hours. Do I have enough time to respond to that? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. This one's due a little bit, this one's not due until October. So we've got a little bit more time to respond and so on. So we can see the different opportunities that are here. What you can do is save the search and then come back so you don't have to rebuild every time. And that helps, with efficiencies a little bit. And what we're going to do next is look at some of these specific opportunities. And let's just try and find one that may look a little interesting here. Services to print out, juror mailings, transcript services. Let's change our search parameters up. You had said expedite, so let's just do that. Expedite. Let's see if that changes. Okay. This all looks like equipment though, so it's probably saying expedite equipment. So we would, you would need to think about how to express what it is that the other company is doing, and find the terminology that the contracting officer is doing. Otherwise, we can just do like construction. There's going to be a bunch of those. Construction. Yeah, so almost 5,000 results. All right, so let's see, just, to take a look at things. Roadway repair, they're humans too. They have typos. That's okay. Have some grace. So we're gonna let's go ahead and look at this one real quick. What we're gonna see is that all of these opportunities are going to be formatted the same way. So we're going to see the logo if they put it there, right, of the agency, the title, that notice ID that I said, sometimes solicitation number, notice ID, it's the same thing, but that's the notice ID. And then the chain of command. So this again, Department of Defense, Army, Army Corps of Engineers, and this specific office is in Tulsa. Okay. We're getting down to a city, right? So this is the region for Army Corps of Engineers. It's a sources sought. So we're in that top line, the pre-solicitation phase. They're looking for an excuse to do a set aside for small businesses. They have to meet their objectives. They want to go out and find small businesses that can do this work. All right, so this is why they're doing this step. It is due, it was published while we were on this call. It was published a few minutes ago, and it is due in a month. So we have a month to respond to this. All right. I could not have picked this better to illustrate that there is not one time that the government, right? The government sends out all of their opportunities. All the time, new opportunities are posting. So you just have to stay on top of it. It is not yet a set aside, which makes sense, right? Because it's sources sought. They're looking for what kind of small businesses can do this type of work. If it were a set aside, it would say it here. But since this is blank, it's not a set aside yet. We think it's probably a good bet because this is the Tulsa office of the Army Corps of Engineers, and Tulsa is pretty close to Council Grove. So it's probably a good bet that this work is to be done in Tulsa area. We sometimes see a description, not always. Sometimes we see a very, very long, exhaustive description. Sometimes we see nothing. But depending on what it is that they're looking for, they'll either have a bunch of details here or attachments here. So let's look real quick at this one and see what we're talking about. Let's see what's going to open up here. There we go. All right, let me zoom in. All right, so now we're looking at some of the details for this specific opportunity. Remembering that it's early stages, so they're not looking for a full proposal yet. To gain knowledge of interest capabilities, blah, blah, blah. And then what did I tell you? Small business, to include the small business community. They're looking for small businesses. They think it's going to be between $1 million and $5 million. Some more details about the program. They're calling out the 8A program. They're specifically calling out the 8A program. That is government translation for the minority-owned small business program. All right. So that tells me they are very, very interested in doing small business work here. And what does this response look like? We're going to talk about response more in part 3, but this is a 7-question response. This is a this might be a page or 2. This is a very, very easy, straightforward response. And half of the questions are talking about, what's the name of your business? Okay, that's, that I'm going to lose sleep over that one, right? Are you a small business? What's your business structure? What's your bonding capability? Right? These are all normal questions that I would expect if they're searching for companies that are able to do this type of work. This is not rocket science, right? So a response to something like this is a very typical sources sought kind of response or requirement. And then guess what? we see, and we're going to see it here. Taylor here is the person in charge of this opportunity. We've got their mailing address, email address. So we're going to send that capabilities statement and source to sought response to this person. I would highly suspect on the website, we're going to see that person too. Yep, there we go. So same person. Now we've got their phone number and their backup phone number and email address. So that is the research. Let's do one more and see if we can see an actual solicitation. Back. And let's find, so we found a source of sought. So let's just look at a solicitation here. But I want to do more of a construction flavor. This is going to be a big one. All right, yeah, let's use that as our example. Again, it was posted this morning. Actually, since that's Pacific time, it was posted while we were on this call. These are live, real results that are always coming up. This one is due, update offers due in January, so we have months to respond to this one. And look at this. So it's an actual solicitation. So they already know that this is going to be a small business set aside. They didn't get two or more minority-owned companies to respond. Maybe they got some of each category, or maybe it's complex enough that they feel the contracting officer feels more comfortable if it's a total small business, but there's enough interest in the small business community to have this as a set aside for that category. And then, like we saw before, some of the information. This is normal, so sometimes they redirect to different websites, so that's okay. So they will tell you more information about the opportunity and details about how to respond. But again, we see the primary point of contact and we see a secondary point of contact, email addresses, phone numbers all day long. Now, don't pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, can I take you out to dinner? Don't do that. First off, they'll hang up the phone. Second off, they will probably kick you out of competition because in this world, it's called OCI, official conflict of interest. If you don't have this, if you have inside information that some other company doesn't have, that's going to give you an advantage. And it's that contracting officer's job to make sure that that playing field is level and fair. So much so that that's why I put this slide up, because it is the contracting officer's job to ensure that all industry folks have the same information and they're not trying to go around the contracting officer to get some additional information. All right. So if you have questions for the contracting officer, hey, ma'am, sir, this doesn't, page 3, paragraph 2 doesn't make sense. Can you please clarify what the government's intent is? That kind of thing. You send that question to the contracting officer on that email address. They list it right there. I just showed you a couple of them. And all of the other companies that are interested and have questions are going to send those questions to the contracting officer. And what's going to happen is the contracting officer is going to collect all of these questions, answer them. They're going to say, okay, here are all the questions. Here are all the answers. They're going to put this in a pretty document, and they're going to post it back out to that website. So what we will see on some of these, let's see if we can find one. We will see a Q&A or questions and answers. I'm just quickly trying to see if we can find one. I'll show you what that kind of looks like. Drawings. Let's take a look at one more. These are newer, so they're not going to have enough time for people to consider. So one of these documents would say Q&A, or questions and answers, or something to that effect. And that will be, like I just showed you, it's not going to tell you who asked the question or what company it came from. It's going to tell you, here are all the questions that everybody has asked, and here are the government's answers. They may not give you an answer. One question that I see a lot is, who is the incumbent for this work? Who had this before? Sometimes they'll tell you, sometimes they won't. Right? So that's how the questions and answers work. All right. So what we have a little bit of time here. So what other questions do you have for me?
I follow you pretty much on how to look for them. Like I said, with this particular company, I know most of her work is done through subcontract. So, and I understand, it's in the construction field, okay? So, we would have to do a deep dive into that and look at opportunities and see if there are any opportunities within that would fit her, what she does.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's usually just asking those questions, and that's the matchmaking, and that's the challenge, because you've got a bunch of different contracting officers that think differently, and
Right.
they're going to call, a hat, and some of them are going to call a hat a cap, and some call it Coca-Cola, some call it pop, right? So it's a terminology thing, and you just have to figure out how to speak that language of all those different folks based on what it is that they do, what that company
Right.
does.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And like I said, this is part 2. So we'll do part 3, which is going to talk more about how to actually do the response.
I've signed up for all 3. Okay.
Awesome. Awesome, Lorraine. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your time today. We hope this workshop was instructive and informative. Please find additional accredited courses and other support services on our website at nc-rgc.com